Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back to Yalla Salesforce. Thank you very much for making the time again that early. I know people have like early morning, people have afternoon. So thank you both for making anyone, regardless where you are. Thank you very much for making the time, having this collaborative session. We will be continuing our journey with the Yalla Salesforce Trailmix. We covered a lot together. And we are trying to align as well the Arabic sessions with the English sessions. So in the next session, we will be doing like in the next week, we're going to do 2 sessions in English in order to catch up English with Arabic. But we covered a lot together. We made 67 badges with 55,000 points so far throughout our journey. We started this from scratch, from the very beginning, starting from what is Trailhead, going through a lot of things from foundation, data modeling, sharing, and then flows. We covered all the flows, trails, and then we started to say, let's wrap up the admin journey. So we almost covered all the admin trail mix. And while we are doing the cert prep for platform administrator and configuration setup, we found that we are missing the user authentication. We covered the identity basics, where we covered the my domain, single sign-on, identity provider, service provider, and all of these great stuff. But for user authentication, we covered last time the first part of it, which was MFA. And we discussed last time that Salesforce started to enforce the multi-factor authentication when you log in using the UI. And we discussed that based on your access, anyone logging in from UI, we have updated dates now. 6th of July and the 20th of July, there's going to be on sandboxes and production. Last week, I believe, it was June and July, but they pushed those timelines a bit. So that's why we have an update yesterday that everything going to be enforced July 6th and July 20th. We discussed that if you have modify all or you have a sysadmin and so on, you need to take it to the next level, and you need to do the anti-phishing multi-factor authentication, where you will need to have like the extra level, which is the physical, either biometric using your finger, your face, or having the YubiKey. But if you are a user that just need to access Salesforce, we have either to use the Salesforce authenticator or using the time-based one-time password authenticators like Microsoft or Google Authenticator. We discussed the priority for them and so on. Today, we're going to continue our journey, going through the next unit within the same badge, which is the user authentication. Let's jump into my domain. So far, so good. If you want to go back into the previous session for identity basics, where we covered all of these ones, you're going to go into the videos and you will find Salesforce Identity Basic, SSO, MFA, IDP, all of these great stuff we covered in here. And if you want to look into the hands-on part of it, where we're going to show demo now for what we done before, we had 2 Salesforce orgs. One is playing the role of identity provider, and the other Salesforce is playing the role of service provider. And we were like moving from one to another, and we saw the SAML tracer and so on. All right, my domain. My domain is when you go to Salesforce and you want to like change and personalize your login experience. So this is how it look like. You will notice as well that my URL in here, this is a subdomain of salesforce.com. In order to put your brand and make your life easier, make your user life easier, having a memorable URL that represents your brand, this is where my domain comes to the picture. Plus, as well, having this experience where you can put your branding, colors, logo, and even the right-hand side, you can still adjust it as well. We're going to go through all of these details. So this is my domain in a nutshell. So what's my domain? It's like your empire within the Salesforce universe. Salesforce is the big universe, and then you have your subdomain that you need to put in order to personalize your access to Salesforce. So instead of using NA30, which is your data center instance ID or your org ID, we need to make it something like this one. I was testing the service provider for Yalla Salesforce, so I made my domain service provider Yalla Salesforce. So And in here, I need to have my own logo. So I put in here, Yalla Salesforce as a service provider. So this is what is my domain. So you want to put something cool as a prefix for the big universe, which is salesforce.com. So what is the advantage of doing that? First, you can easily remember it because I can say it's Yalla Salesforce.salesforce.com. So it's easier to remember. You can as well have multi-sessions opening. You know, when you open like an instance and you have this URL, and then it will not allow you to use the same URL for another instance. So if I have in here like this service provider and I have another one called identity provider, but I have two different URLs in here, I can be playing within those two orgs within the same browser. So I can navigate between both of them. But if I'm using like the data center URL at or login.salesforce.com and so on, and I have all of them in the same session, the cookies and so on will be confused which one is which. So having a uniquely identifier URL for your Salesforce instance will make the life easier. So work in multiple Salesforce org in the same browser. Set up single sign-on with third-party identity vendors. So let's step back. What it is in the first place? It's single sign-on. We don't want to confuse our users having 10 applications. Everyone has its own username and password. So we need to make our users' life easier by logging in into one place, and this place is gonna authorize me to access a lot of these applications, which we just mentioned 10. So one username and password. Go to the identity provider who check your identity and making sure that you are who you are claiming you are, and then once yes, saying yes, you are that person and you are eligible to access those applications, it's gonna redirect you back and saying you are in. So you don't need to like do multiple login. So my domain playing a big role in here. So when I come in here, you will find that I didn't apply any SSO. So what is my option in here? Provide username and password. This is from identity provider perspective. But in here, I have an option to click a button, and this will allow me to go to the identity provider. And once I am there, logged in, it's gonna redirect me back in here. So I don't need to provide here username and password, but I have the option to just use the SSO. How we put that together? This was in the my domain, and we're gonna open this up together. So far, so good. Perfect. Now we have the option two. We have either SAML, which is an XML-based like SSO, which is the SAML part, which we have an identity provider and we have a service provider, or we can use OpenID Connect, which is an auth provider. We can sometime when you are logging into application, it asks you, do you want to log in using Google? And then you put your Google account to go to those auth provider, and again, Google authenticates you and then return it back saying, yes, you are authorized. So auth provider as well is another way in order to authenticate you. So let me go to, so we can test this guy. When I click login, it takes you to the identity provider, asking you if I don't have a session open. It's like in other organization, if we are not using a Salesforce as an identity provider, it might take you to HDFS, it might take you to Okta, it might take to you somewhere who can play the role of being an identity provider. So I'm gonna take my user for the identity provider in here, which is this one. I'm gonna take my user, put it in here, and I'm gonna put my password. So this is the only username and password for me that I know. Identity provider gonna do all of that magic, and it's gonna do all of the redirect, and you will notice that we are back to the service provider. So in here, let me just do it one more time. I'm in the service provider. Now I have an active session. In theory, when I click that button, it's gonna go back and forth between the identity provider and the service provider. We will see that what are those SAML exchanges. But I started my journey from service provider, went to the identity provider, found that I have an active session, returned me back into the service provider, and I am logged in now. So I am assuming if I came in here into my user and I went to the details and looked in here, you will be able to see that my login history happened through SAML, SFDC, initiated SSO. All of that happened not using my username and password, but happened using this SAML exchange. I'll pause. Everyone is following? So far, so good? Love it. Love it. All right. So let's see my domain, since the main topic in here for this unit was my domain. So let's go for my domain. You will notice that when I go for my domain details, you will notice in here that I have in here, my current domain is service provider Yalla Salesforce. This is what I choosing for myself. And I checked the availability and I deployed, and now this is my URL. So this is where I changed the default to be service provider. What was the default? If we scroll down, you will find that it was Brave, something, now, what, and so on. So that's why I moved it from something that no one can recognize into the one that I can easily remember, which is the service provider, Yalla Salesforce. So this is where I change my domain. The second part in here is routing and policies. Routing and policies, when you enter your URL, it goes through the internet and then try to reach to that data center in order to reach your instance. So rather than going through this big ocean of internet, Salesforce is trying to optimize how can we reach to that data center. So there is something called Edge Network, Salesforce Edge Network. It takes your request to that data center into your closest data center for Salesforce. And then internally, once we reach from the internet into the closest Salesforce network point, now the navigation internally will be way more efficient because it's within Salesforce private network. And this is what this is doing. It's a routing method. Going to the Salesforce Edge Network global, that means regardless where I am, take my request into the most closest point for me globally, and then in order to reach. This is very useful for caching, for optimizing the performance, and so on. And you might say, no, I don't want to go global. I just want to go through the locations within the United States only, and then I will be redirecting. So this is the option for Salesforce Edge Network. If you want to search more, just take this. You will find the help article that explains the Salesforce Edge and understanding the Salesforce Edge. But this is in a nutshell how it works, and it's very useful for the networking and so on, and optimizing the caching and so on. So far, so good at a high level. Now, the next part of that is the login policy. We can say once we enabled the my domain and I have my personalized URL, I can say prevent people from going to https login.salesforce.com. You know, when you are logging into Salesforce, you can go, if you are in production, go to login.salesforce.com. If you are in a sandbox, you go to test.salesforce.com. And you can say, no, people, once I enabled that, I don't want to allow people to go to this generic URL. And I want people to go to my Salesforce service provider, Yalla Salesforce. So if you want to prevent people going from that generic, this checkbox is for you. Same thing, if you have an integration and you are authenticating using the SOAP API for login.salesforce.com, if you are using like Informatica IDMC, if you are using Talent or anything that use SOAP API login, now rather than again allowing the HTTP login.salesforce.com and you want to make it still service provider, this option is for you as well. Cookies require first-party use of Salesforce cookies. So Salesforce, when you are cookies in general, that the Salesforce is using the cookie in order to store that you authenticated into this Salesforce instance, and then store some information within those cookies. So if you want to make sure as well that this cookie that Salesforce, it's URL based. So in order to make sure that your domain is used within the cookie, not the generic one, not the data center one, and so on, again, this is option for you. So it's an attribute within the cookie. As per my understanding, this first party, you want to make sure that this URL is the one used in storing your cookies rather than the generic one. But in general, when we come to my domain, usually in here, we are just changing the login policy if you want to enforce in here. And that's about it. Change your URL, and then you need to decide whether you need to prevent or to not prevent based on those login policies. So far, so good? Lovely. In here, previous my domain URL, we just mentioned that this is my current my domain URL, which will be used. But still, Salesforce is storing the old URL for me. So if people is still using the old URL for any reason, you wanna say, Salesforce, when you receive a hit to this Brave, the old one, redirect me to the new one. So this is the option in here, redirect the previous my domain URL. Do we need to notify the user that we're gonna redirect? If you wanna do that, you will be putting in here notify user. So let me do this. And if I went back in here, said logout, and I used the old URL, it's gonna take me, I'm assuming it is gonna be redirected to the service provider, despite the fact that I used the old one. And when I log in now, I am in, IDP made it happen, but let's go for my domain now. And within my domain, say, alert the user, and let's see what the user experience is gonna be. So save it. And I'm gonna be logging out again. And I'll be using the old URL. You will find a slightly different experience. Saying, now, as a user, you will be redirected to another URL than the one you are using. It should be. So let me inspect, remove the cache, making sure that everything, or maybe I didn't hit save. So let's see. I am removing all the cache. And now I'm using the old URL. And when I'm using the old URL, it's still taking me without notifying. So let me make sure that, yes, when I clicked, it says we moved. This was the old URL, but now we're going to redirect you to this new URL. So it's just a notification, and it's not the same experience because I'm using SSO as well. That's why it took me to the service provider, came back, and then realized that it's a different URL, so it notified the user. Now, going on into my domain. Within my domain as well, there is an option in here, says log redirections. So if I want to track who is still using the old URL, and I need to track who is still having this redirection experience, there is an application within Salesforce called event monitoring. So event monitoring is tracking a lot of things, a lot of events. So event monitoring, in here, you will be able to enable it from event monitoring settings. But even we don't need to do that because Salesforce is going to do that automatically if I enable this, but I'm just letting you know what is the event monitoring. So the event monitoring, it monitors a lot of things within the Salesforce. And it can happen hourly, it can happen daily, and so on. So you will have access to this event log file browser. And you can say, I need to see the logs from that day to this day. And then it will ask you which event type you want to track. So all of these things you can track using the event monitoring. The one we are talking about is host name redirects. So if you enable this checkbox, which we were trying to track who still use the old URL and who is which lead to have a redirection, this is the event type that Salesforce will be using within the event login browser. And then now you can say, I need to track this daily or hourly and so on. But let's go back to my domain, because this is, we don't need to be there. While we are in my domain, if I came in here and I said within here, within the redirection, I need the log redirections. So in here, in event monitoring, it's gonna look the successful and blocked redirections. Everything is gonna be stored. And when I hit save, you will find the button that you can download redirection log. So you don't need to go there into the event monitoring. Salesforce already making it available in here within the same My Domain UI in order to track those redirections happening. Now, so what we covered? We covered moving from a generic domain into a subdomain personalized. We covered how can we prevent people from using the generic login.salesforce or test.salesforce.com. We covered how can we notify the user that the redirection is happening and the old domain, and how can we do some event monitoring around that. The next part is personalizing the login experience. So in here, when I hit edit, you have an option to say, I am using the login form, which is the username and password. I have an option as well. If I configured an SSO for this org, I need to have the option to say, use this SSO in order to be able to log in. That's why we had this button, which we said, when you hit that button, it's going to take you to the service provider. Without having this checkbox, you will not be able to see the button. Okay, so this is the IDP Yalla Salesforce. And now I put a logo. I use the service provider My Domain, which is my service domain Yalla Salesforce. So you can put what are the different authentication service available for you, username and password. If you have an auth provider, you will have Google in here. If you have an identity provider, you can put it in here. You can add your logo. You can add your background color. So we used to have green when we were just checking, but I can change it to any other color. It can be yellow. And then you have the right frame URL, which is on the right-hand side. We had a big yellow. We have a big Salesforce picture and so on. So we can change that as well. Let me save. So I can relate things in here. And I just need to maximize it. I'm zooming in. Okay. And I will be logging out. Now, if I went back to my service provider, let me get the URL. Here we go. Became yellow because we just changed the color. The logo remained. The right-hand side is this part, IDC info snapshot. So if you want to have your own personalized picture, big announcement, and so on, you can still change this part too. And this was the, in My Domain, it was called the right part of your experience for the login. So My Domain in here, within My Domain, you will be able to see in here the right frame URL. You're gonna put a URL and it's gonna be split, and we're gonna do it in here. Last piece in here, and then we can go back to the module, crash this unit, which is use the native browser for user authentication on iOS. When you have a mobile app, or you have your custom application, either your Salesforce application or a custom application where you use mobile SDK, and you want a user to authenticate, it can open like a small window iframe, which will allow you to put a username and password, or it can take you to the browser within the mobile to put your username and password. So either within the app, give you a small window to log in, or open Safari if you are on iOS, or open whatever browser you have, and enter your normal username and password. This is which is saying use the native browser for the user, either in iOS or Android. Now, allow sharing native browser session. If you have multiple applications, and now it took you to the native browser and you put your username and password, so you are authenticated, do you want to share the same session with another app or not? So if you have 2-3 apps, all of them needs a Salesforce valid session, and you used not the application authentication, you use the browser, and you have a valid session. Do you want to share this session across all of these different apps or not? So allow sharing native browser session for user authentication on iOS or an Android. So this is, in a nutshell, everything within My Domain page. Let's summarize. Custom URL, prevent people logging from those generic URLs. And then we moved into the event monitoring part, the redirection part. And finally, we talked about the branding for your login experience. So far, so good? We got it? Fantastic. So let's go back in here. We got everything in here because having my domain, set my domain policies. So we talked about that we have a very personalized one called gdiatic.lightning.salesforce.com. We went to my domain and we done edit. For under routing, we have the global and the regional. This is where we were talking about Salesforce Edge Network. And then we have the login policy to require login from my domain into those, prevent using those generic ones, login.salesforce or welcome.salesforce.com. Same thing for the SOAP if you have an integration, which are those options we discussed them in details in here. So this is the first part. And then under redirections, this is where we are redirecting from the old to new and how we enable the login redirection and download those event monitoring. And this is what we are highlighting in here. And the log contains information about redirection. Either it's successful redirection or a logged redirection. And you can get this either daily or hourly. Finally, customize your login page. This is the vanilla login page. This is the left-hand side, which we have different experience. We have color, we have branding, we have SSO available in here, and we have the right-hand side. We discussed this part where we can change the colors and so on, and there is a specs for this specific image. We can't have any picture. It has to be within 250 by 125 pixel. So that's why you will find the my logo is small, saying service provider and so on. And we can use this URL to just play with the right-hand side. We need a URL in order to put it in this right-hand side. So if I came back in here and said within the authentication configuration, within the right frame URL, I can put this URL and they're going to generate random picture every time. But in real organization, you need to have your important announcement. You have your own personalized pictures, anything that within HTTPS. So if I now said, let's log out from here, and I'm gonna put in here the service provider URL. Let me get it from here, copy, and you will be able to see Salesforce, whatever was on the right-hand side gone. And now I have this lovely picture, which is every time it just generates a new picture, but you have the option to personalize the entire login screen left and right. All right. And we discussed about the mobile part of the experience, and we are done with my domain. We covered it all. Anyone has any questions with my domain?
Nope, we're good.
Lovely. All right. You need my domain in place to do which of the following? You need authenticate user is a part of the authentication itself. Is it working in multiple Salesforce org in the same browser? Because you have two different URLs. Do you need to set up single sign-on with the third-party identity vendors? So A and B or B and C, guess in the chat or guess loudly if you are comfortable. All right, so let's see. B, C. Perfect.
I was going to say E.
E. Teamwork. Thank you very much. I vote for E as well. What section?
I do like that you said guess loudly.
Sorry, Anne, can you repeat?
I said I like that you said guess loudly.
Yes. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Anne. What section of my domain page and setup contains options for branding your login page? What was the name of the section at last, the one down there? Is it redirection? Is it authentication configuration, routing and policies? My domain. This is memory test. Anyone remember? The routing and policies. I personally thought it's a B, so let's validate. My domain. And within my domain, I don't want to lose points if I can double check. It's authentication configuration. So this is the part of the branding within my domain. It's called authentication configuration. So it is B. We made it.
Wow.
It's a memory test. We made this unit, so
This
Great.
is a Salesforce wording that you have to remember,
Yeah. To be honest, they can simply name it branding. Long
That
run
would make it too
anyway.
easy.
All right, team. So we made the my domain part of the journey, and this is how our journey usually starts while we are configuring a service provider or identity provider. In case we are using Salesforce, we need to personalize our URLs in order to, and this is allowing us as well to add the SSO and the auth provider and so on. So let's see, back to the session that we made Salesforce as an identity provider and service provider. Let's refresh our minds with those steps. So this is the identity provider URL that we used. Let me go there and refresh our minds what we did. We started our journey back in the days from my domain as well for the service provider, and we changed my domain in here to be IDP Yalla Salesforce. So we made it identity provider URL, and then we didn't do anything in here other than other branding to just differentiate. Yeah, go ahead, Hildy, please.
Yeah, I wanted to be sure because, when you change the domain, it's still free.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you don't have to pay because it's inside Salesforce.
it's a
So it's like
subdomain.
englobe of inside Salesforce. It's not like when you buy a domain for your company and you put it. So this is different because you just change a part of
Exactly.
it. Is the reason?
Yes.
Okay.
This is subdomain under Salesforce. You have the option as well to have a custom domain, but even here within, they said this is a different complicated process than just my domain. My domain is subdomain, but there is something called a custom domain. But they even said here this is another problem for another day. But subdomain is for free. Yes. All right. Hey Dipti, thank you very much for joining. All right. Back to the single sign-on. We were in here. We said we changed my domain in the identity provider. All what we are doing in the identity provider is just writing identity provider. And within identity provider, you have the option to download certificate and download metadata. Download metadata is just what is this org, what's the all the configuration that we will go into the service provider and import the metadata rather than filling everything about the identity provider manual. Okay, so download metadata, it's just making your life easier. Even if you are in Okta, you can download the metadata rather than taking all of these details and then you are filling it manual. Download metadata and go to the service provider, say upload metadata. The other button that you will need to do it from the identity provider is downloading the certificate. This is a very sensitive exchange of information between a server that a user trying, or an application a user trying to access, and identity provider which validating this user that it's allowed to access this service and enjoy all what this service offers. So in order to secure this exchange back and forth between the identity provider and service provider, these requests and response has to be signed using a certificate. So we have either service provider initiated flow, which is I am in here, I am in the service provider, and when I log out from here, when I say service provider initiated flow, that means that the journey started from the application, not from the identity provider. So I am starting from the application I'm trying to access, which is my service provider. I'm trying to access this service provider, which is the application. And now I'm gonna go. You will notice that Salesforce is gonna redirect me to the identity provider to login. So that's why it's a service provider initiated flow. So what we are doing something called the SAML request. I'm requesting that I need to access. And then the identity provider gonna validate that I am Bassem and I'm allowed to access. And then the identity provider gonna respond back saying, yes, you are allowed. So this is a service provider initiated flow. We are starting the journey by sending a SAML request, and then identity provider gonna validate, and we'll respond back by SAML response into my org. So we will show you very briefly in here. If I take this guy, put it in here, and I have an extension called SAML tracer. This SAML tracer gonna show me what's happening to see that visual back and forth. So if I came in here, I said, let me clear everything. I'm gonna hit login with the IDP. You will notice that there is a SAML request to happen and SAML response. So let's see that in action. So in here, when I click this tool called SAML Tracer, just to see you the SAML exchange between the service provider and the identity provider, you will notice in here that the first thing was a SAML request. What will be my destination? I am going to service provider. So I started from the service provider, and the destination is identity provider. So the journey started from SP, and the destination was IDP. So this is a request, SAML request from my service provider, went to the identity provider, and now the identity provider replied to me saying, yes, you are allowed to be in. So the next one is the destination now became back to the service provider and saying, yes, you are allowed to access. So it's just a SAML exchange. I'm coming to the application I'm trying to access. It's going to redirect me to the one who will check my ID. And once I check my ID, they respond back saying, yes, you are allowed to be in. So this is the exchange, SAML back and forth. And what we were saying, what brought us in here, that this exchange of information need to be very secured. So that's why there is a signature and the certificate is needed. That's why when you scroll down into the SAML request response exchange, you will find in here a signature. And it's digitally signed saying, yes, this is no man in the middle can happen in here, because this signature signed using a public key within the certificate. It went there, it validated, private key, encrypted and decrypted, and so on. All of these great stuff between the identity provider and service provider. So this is the signature which happened because I have, when I was in here within the identity provider, I downloaded this certificate from identity provider, and we will show you the other side, which is the service provider. We use the same certificate to have this mutual trust between the IDP and service provider. I'll pause. Any questions? So I will summarize everything we talked, but in a nutshell, we went to a Salesforce, we went to the identity provider, we downloaded 2 files, and you will find the demo that I shared in the beginning of this session. It's just doing all of these steps one by one. And what we done from Salesforce Admin Provider, 2 things. We downloaded the metadata that has all the details, and we downloaded the certificate that it will be used by the service providers to have this mutual trust, that both of them have the same certificate and they trust each other. As simple as that. So this is the identity provider. Hildy, go ahead.
I have a question. So the identity provider and the service provider is Salesforce, or it's another third company that handles that? Because the certification is Salesforce who give the certification when you get the license and all that. But it's another company who handle all that, or it's Salesforce?
That's a great compound question. Identity provider can be Salesforce, it can be all of other things. So we are here using Salesforce as an identity provider, but it can be Okta if your organization using Okta. It can be HDFS, it can be anything that provide this identity provider feature. For the certificate, there is in the certificate, there is a self-signed certificate, and there is a signing authority certificate, which is the third-party provider for those certificates, but this is a paid version of it. So in here, when I download certificate, this is a self-signed certificate. That means it got generated and self-assigned within Salesforce, so it's free. There is no signing authority added to the picture in order to sign and make sure that we are talking to each other. So back to your question, identity provider itself, it can be Salesforce, can be anything. The service provider, the service can be a Salesforce, it can be Outlook, it can be Gmail, it can be anything. But in this specific demo, we are using Salesforce as an identity provider, and we are using Salesforce as a service provider, so you can see both configurations. Make sense? Lovely. And back to your certificate-specific question, this is a self-signed certificate, and you will find it in here. Even within the setup, you will find certificate and key management. You can create a self-signed certificate, or you can create a CA, which is the signing authority, signed certificate, and then you can export it as a key store and so on, right? We covered everything from the identity provider side of the house. Now, what are those configurations from the service provider side of the house? So if I went to the service provider, I am going to the setup and I go to the single sign-on. And within the single sign-on, first step is to enable SAML, because this is exchange need to be enabled. And then I come in here, I can say new, and you start filling all of these details manually, which is happening within this module. Or I can new from metadata file, and it will ask me to choose a file and then upload it, gonna do it for me. So there is no need for you to fill it manually. And this is where we have. It can be a URL as well, that this URL go and grab all of these information. So when we done that, when we downloaded, and then we came into here having all the details that we need. The only thing that was needed from us was to have the identity provider certificate. Remember, in the identity provider, we downloaded two files. The metadata file that enabled me to do that. The second one was the certificate, which is the self-signed certificate. I am coming into the service provider, uploading the same certificate accordingly. Now we have a mutual trust between the identity provider and the service provider. And now here where we are uploading the certificate, this both now are aligned on the same page, sharing the same certificate, so they have this mutual trust. And then I am putting in here who is the entity ID. So I am saying this is my domain. I am putting in here the SP. And I am saying who is the issuer for this metadata. I am saying this is my IDP. And then it's gonna ask me a very great question. When I log into Salesforce, what will be the user attribute that will be used in order to say Basim is available? I can send the username. I'm assuming if Basim has a username in there, we'll be able to identify, yes, validate using the username. Or in the world of single sign-on, we are using something called Federation ID. You will hear this word very frequent within the single sign-on life. It's called the Federation Identifier. In any org, I'm assuming you might have an employee ID, H1234, S79, whatever. This is usually comes from the Active Directory, and you have your employee number. So we are saying, guys, we will not be dealing with username. Workday might username different than Salesforce, than the IDP, and all of these things. So let's align on using the employee ID itself as the way of communication between all of these service provider and identity provider. And this is where I am saying SAML identity type, do not use the Salesforce username, but use the Federation ID from the user object. The next question is, where can I store this Federation ID on the user? Now, when you go to the user setup and go to the user, within users, and when I open my user, and without enabling anything, but you might not be aware that it was already there, single sign-on section within the user, you will find something called Federation ID. Standard field, it's always there. If you are using a single sign-on with Federation ID, you need to put your employee number in here. So when we enable single sign-on in the beginning and we have all our users, we need to have a lovely data loader thing to say update all those users with their employee numbers. So when we have a single sign-on, we will be doing the same. So this is from service provider perspective. But the identity provider should be able to know as well that Basim Federation ID have the same accordingly. When I pass this SAML request to the identity provider and saying, we will not be sending a username, we'll be sending saying, Ismail trying to log in Salesforce. Will you allow it? The identity provider gonna validate, do I have a user that had this Ismail and it's allowed? And then, so if I went back to the identity provider, to my user again, in here, I should be able to see that my Federation ID, even in the identity provider, is the same Federation ID. So Federation ID, you will be able to see that, Ismail as well. So Ismail in the service provider went to the identity provider. Do you have a user for Bismail? Is that Bismail is allowed the response with the SAML request saying, yes, you are good. All of this exchange happening using a certificate. It's signed, it's secure. Now you are in. So far, so good? Lovely. That's fantastic. So this is the single sign-on screen. And we done that. So we put in here the URLs, we put the metadata, we put the certificate, we identified that we will be exchanging this identity type using the federation ID, not the username, and we just hit save. The last piece was to go to my domain. And within my domain, in here, I am just saying use the identity provider, which we just defined as a way of login. So this is where we are putting in here. And this is wrapping up everything we done with the demo. We configured the IDP, downloaded the metadata certificate. We came to the SP, we changed my domain. We imported those to the single sign-on. We put the federation ID. We exchanged everything, and we are happy family. Everything is working as expected. So far, so good? Great. So this is when we done the demo, having both identity provider and service provider. Here, Salesforce, in order to not make it complicated within this unit, they just made a Heroku app that simulated an identity provider. And then we're going to play with the same configuration, but using this Heroku app. Single sign-on. SSO has lots of advantages. You spend less time managing passwords. You have only one username and password for our identity provider and call it a day. Your employee saves time when they don't have to manually log into Salesforce, and this login takes 5 to 20 seconds accumulated over the month and years. It's going to take a lot of time. So a single sign-on. More people use Salesforce. User can send out links. So if you have an active session and you click the link, it opens up for you. You can manage access to sensitive information from one place. So imagine that I decided to leave the organization rather than going to 15 apps and trying to disable your username and password. I'll just go to one place, which the identity provider say, this user is no longer valid. Accordingly, you don't need to manage all of these applications, just one centralized place. We will have inbound SSO and outbound SSO. This is where we were saying it's a service provider initiated or it's an identity provider initiated. So service provider initiated, this is exactly it. When I go to from here into the service provider and I log out and then I log in, I start my journey from the service provider. Login, redirect to the IDP. You will find the URL even change it. Or I can go to the identity provider. So one of the steps that we didn't mention, that there is an extra step after I configure everything from the identity, the service provider. There is one more step into the identity provider, which we used to create something called connected app, but it's no longer connected app. It's external client app in the new version of Salesforce. So it's called the external client app. And the external client app, you will be able to see in here that we defined an external client app, which will be external client app. Those are applications. You want to have it from Salesforce to be able to access this external client. So which will open in here within the app launcher. I can say, while I am in the identity provider, I don't want to go to the service provider and click the button to authenticate and come. No, I am already within the identity provider and I want to go to the service provider straight. So there is always two options. Either you start your journey from the application you are trying to access and the authentication going to happen in the IDP and then allow you, or you go to one screen, which is thank you very much, Anne. Have a great weekend. Bye. So, or you go to the identity provider itself, and they're gonna open for you a tiles, like in Okta. If you open the Okta itself from identity provider perspective, it's gonna give you a lot of tiles saying which application you want to access. Same thing in Salesforce. App launcher playing this role for us. I can have within the identity provider saying, no, I need to start my journey from the identity provider and I want to navigate to the service provider. So it works both ways. So either It's an identity provider initiated or a service provider initiated. And this is the inbound and outbound thing. Configure inbound SSO with a third-party provider. Remember from the last time that we still need to enforce the MFA. Even if you have single sign-on, you still need to have a multi-factor authentication. Regardless, you are using Salesforce as a multi-factor authentication, or as we mentioned, the SSO, the identity provider, might send a signal to Salesforce saying, yes, you've done the MFA part of your single sign-on journey. Yes, that it's recorded. And we're going to upload it to the YouTube right after the session. So in here, we are saying either it's just we are using the Salesforce single sign-on and MFA. Sorry. Either we are using Salesforce as an MFA provider. So we are using the SSO, and then we come to Salesforce. We are using the Salesforce authenticator in order to go in. Or SSO itself might have the MFA part of the journey as well, and send the signal to Salesforce, say, yeah, you are allowed, and you already done your part from MFA, so we don't need to do another round of MFA within Salesforce. Now let's configure the SSO journey using this Heroku app, and we're gonna wrap up the session for today. So the head of IT department will you set up Salesforce users with SSO so that they can log into your Salesforce org. Here is the app. So if we open this URL, you will find in here, it's a identity provider, which will allow you to download the certificate, download the metadata, and all of these great stuff. It's exactly like what we done with Salesforce as an identity provider, but they built that app in order to support that module. We're going to create a federation ID. We just agreed what is the federation ID. It's your employee number in both sides. You're going to set up SSO setting within Salesforce, set up Salesforce setting in SSO provider, and make sure everything is working. So let me open the same org that we done it last time, which was this MFA org. So let me do that. Take this guy in here, and now I have an org. Use built-in authenticator, use Salesforce Authenticator mobile app. Seems I disconnected this org last time, so I need to do, it's a good refresh for Salesforce Authenticator. So I'm gonna open Salesforce Authenticator in here, add an account, and I will be adding a 2-word like the one we done last time, and I'll be connecting. Now I am connecting. I got the push notification. I got it verified, and I am in the org now. Great. So I have my org and I have my module. After that, we need to go to the federation ID. We agreed this is the employee number. Go to the user, and then under SIA, put this as a federation ID. So in which case, it's better for a company to use a federation ID instead of normal login. So federation ID usually used with the single sign-on. When you need to make sure that you are not using your username and password. You have one username and password, which is in the identity provider. There is another type of applications called identity provider. Salesforce has a service to do this identity provider. And in a nutshell, it's like you are approaching a border and someone need to take your passport and say, yes, you are. So the border experience is the identity provider. You are trying to access somewhere, which is the application. They will say, no, you need to go to the officer, take your ID, validate it, and then say, yes, you are allowed, and then they will allow you to do that. In order, the passport for you in that scenario is your federation ID, which is, I'm saying that we need Deputy to be able to access this specific one. So no need anymore for username and password. We just need to make sure that this identity provider and service provider are in good terms. They trust each other. We have a certificate exchange. They can communicate. And then I am sending your federation ID, which say, yes, Deputy is allowed. Yes, gonna check certain things and say, yes, go ahead for access. So federation ID is another way to be used within the single sign-on experience rather than using normal username and password, because you might have 15 applications and you need to memorize 15 username and passwords, so make it easier for the user. I hope I covered your question, Hildy. All right. Now, we need to take this guy. We want to go to the user. We created a user last time called Sia. So I'll go to the users, and within users, we have Sia in here. Here we go. We didn't put Federation ID last time because we didn't talk yet single sign-on, but now it's at the time. Federation ID, it's empty. And I'm going to put Sia Federation ID. And I'm going to hit save. Now, let's set up SSO. In order to do that, I need to open a browser, which is this guy. And then I need to go SAML Identity Provider, and I need to download the certificate. So I'll be downloading the certificate exactly like what we done before with the Salesforce last session. And once I downloaded the certificate, I need to save it. And then I'll go to the Salesforce org, go to the single sign-on. First, as we just explained, this has to be enabled. SAML enabled. So SAML enabled. And I'm going to hit save. And now I need to define new. This Heroku app didn't download for me the metadata. Accordingly, I have to fill it manual myself. So I'm going to click new, and I'm going to name it Axiom Test App. The issuer is the identity provider. Last time it was IDP Yalla Salesforce. Now it's Axiom Heroku app. So I'm going to put this in the issuer. And now I need to put the certificate, which I just downloaded now. So this is the downloaded Axiom certificate in here. All right, identity provider certificate. And now we want to use which crypto way of exchanging those encryption between the IDP and the SP. We are using SHA-1. There's SHA-1, SHA-256. And then I will be saying, I'm not using the username. Yes. Yes, Hussein. So it can be a custom Axiom thing. It can be a Salesforce. It can be Azure, Microsoft. It can be any identity provider. The answer is yes. Now, we are saying we are not using the username. We want to use the Federation ID because we just updated the Federation ID for SIA. And then identity is name identifier is in the subject. So this is where in the which attribute within the SAML back and forth we are putting those Federation IDs, identity in the name identifier element for the subject element. And now we are doing HTTP redirect. You will be noticing when we were trying to access the service provider, it redirected me to the identity provider and then returned me back to the service provider. All of these redirection is happening. Now, entity ID is my domain. URL, make sure it's identity, it has HTTPS for my domain. So in here, this entity ID is my domain for this org. In order to do it, I'm gonna go to the setup. I'll go to the setup, and from the setup, I'll go to my domain. And within my domain, I need to make sure that I got the domain, and I need to wrap it up with HTTPS. And then I'm gonna put my domain in there. Okay, which is aligned with this one, but I wanted to make sure that I'm following the right instructions and get it from the formal place for it. Now we are done. We created a new SAML single sign-on. We uploaded the certificate. We put the identity provider details. We put the service provider details, and we used the Federation ID in order to do that. And we have the redirection is already happening. Now, I need to go to the identity provider and tell the identity provider that this service provider is expecting service from you. So I'll go back in here, which is, here we go. And I will say, generate a SAML response. So this is the instruction in order to test it. So in here, SAML identity provider, generate a SAML response. So I'm gonna click this one. We saw it live that we are, the SAML response, it's not just a SAML tracer, which will show up to us here. Last time we done the POC and we were able to see those SAML exchange allowed me to access the org. So we done it the right way, but this is as well another way of just testing the same knowledge. which is I'm saying in here, I need to use SAML. We are using SAML too. I have the federation ID in there, which is the one we used for SIA up there. Let me scroll up, get the federation ID. I'll put it in here. Now, after that, we are filling in the other information. So we put in here, we put the federation ID. The issuer is Axiom. What is the issuer? This is the identity provider. Redirect URL, the URL from Salesforce SAML single sign-on page, which is this guy, the endpoint, which we are using in here. This is the service provider. Put it in here. This is the recipient. This is the entity ID. What else? I believe that's about it. We finished. Make it all work. So request the SAML. It's gonna do for me a SAML, and you will be able to say that this is responding using SAML. And we saw it in a better way when we opened the SAML tracer. But again, this is just to test that we are doing in there. And when I this SAML, if I took it, this is gonna allow me to enter. And that's about it. So we just put it together. You will be able to see within this, there was an issuer, a destination. You will find a certificate, a signature, everything we saw in the SAML before. So this is the certificate and the signature and the ID. You will find even in here. Here we go. This is the federation ID, which said, yes, you are the same person. The response had the federation ID. So everything we talked about before. So let's validate that we've done all the things that they are expecting us to do, and celebrate that we done everything related to MFA, SSO, IDP, all of these great stuff. Hopefully we got it right. Any questions? Woo! We made it. I hope it was useful. It was great to get into that level of details. You might be facing it as an admin, trying to configure this MFA after the enforcement. You might be in a position that you need to talk identity provider and service provider. Hopefully it was useful, and wish you a wonderful day. See you next week. Bye-bye.